I've been pondering this question for the last 3 years. Is it better to buy a sim racing setup or a real race car? What would you do? Obviously, a sim racing setup is way less money in most cases, but a real race car is real. You're actually on a racetrack, you're doing things, you're learning. I'm torn because of two big reasons. Number one, price, and number two, the convenience of it. In price terms, it should be a lot cheaper to sim race because even if you spend a lot of money and you get a crazy sim racing rig like this is awesome. It's $26,000. Which is basically a cheap race car. You get something that's that awesome with full motion. You get to practice basically all the same driving skills that you would if you're driving a real race car, but the price is so much lower than operating a real race car because you've got no trailer, no truck, no consumables, no track fees, no insurance, no racing gear, any of that stuff. You could race an entire day and spend $0 or maybe spend like $2 on electricity to power the thing. And that's huge. The other huge part of the sim racing equation to me is just the convenience of it. Because when you're sim racing, I could just be in this room with you right now driving a race car, sim racing. I wouldn't have to drive like an hour and a half to the nearest track and go and bring a trailer and do all that stuff. It would be so much easier to just pop in here. I could do like 30 minutes a day of driving practice and get the sim work in and not have to put up with all that junk. But it's just not cool. Look at how cool this thing is. Somebody bought this purpose-built formula car with a rotary engine for 17 grand. I mean, think about what an incredible experience this would be to own. The thing is on slicks, it's got aero, it's lightweight, it weighs basically nothing. It was set up to be a Formula Mazda race series car, and so it's probably super over-engineered. I doubt it needs a ton of maintenance. I mean, rotaries aren't notorious for being super reliable, but still, something like this is just gonna be such a visceral, incredible experience compared to basically any car, let alone a sim racing car. And the beauty of committing to a full race car like this is it's purpose built. So you're not gonna have the kind of like wear and tear issues that you do on these big Camaros and Corvettes and all these street cars that you try and take to the track because they're really just not made for it. Something like this is really made for it. I mean, it's a single seater, manual transmission. It's just epic to get something like this. And thankfully, because it's not like the crazy fastest thing in the world, it's pretty cheap. I mean, 17 grand for a toy, that's a lot of money. But 17 grand for a race car that can go out and like reliably set down super fast lap times, that's very cheap. I was also deeply tempted by this car. Look at the build on this 1997 Miata race car. This car sold for $1,000 less than that last one, $16,000. They say in the comments of this, the owner has run on similar tracks that spec Miatas run on all the time, and it's something like 2 to 5 seconds a lap faster than spec Miatas typically are. This thing is so clean. It looks really well built, really fresh. It's got nice aero. It's basically just a Miata that has everything turned up to 11. There's not turbos and superchargers and craziness. Just a normal engine, but a very, very clean race car. Ugh, nice wheels. It's on RPF 1s. The thing's got a cage. It's got an up-to-date seat. Everything in the front has been sorted with that aero. It just looks so clean and so nice. And I want to say, based on the end plate on the wing there, that this was part of the Super Miata Racing Series, which is a California-based Miata-only racing series. And they've got a few different classes. I'm assuming it's still going. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in California and you know. But it was basically like, let's do really competitive races in a really interesting way for probably less money than spec Miata, and you go faster. And so it's like a really cool premise for a race series, and I believe this was a car from that race series. Something that we can't miss about buying a real race car is that you could be in real races. I mean, this thing is set up to go door-to-door racing with real people on a real racetrack. Think about how epic that experience is, and this is what's always drawn me to cars over and above other sports. I can go and buy something like this, that's a real race car, and go out and jump on the same tracks that the professionals drive on, sometimes with professionals. When can you do that with baseball or football or any other sport like that? They don't just say like, hey, this is Bob Thompson from Michigan. He's going to come and play linebacker now for a while. They don't do that. You can't do that. And no, it's not a Formula One car. It's not NASCAR. It's not like to that level, but you're out there doing the same thing in the same place, sometimes with the same people. I just think that connectivity is so much cooler than other sports because you're out there in the thick of it, just like they are. But even a car like this is a huge financial commitment because it's probably not street legal. So you probably need a truck, a trailer, $17,000 to buy it. It's not going to have terrible consumables in the terms of like tires and fluids and brakes and stuff like that, but they're still there. A car like this that's a real but cheap race car is still going to cost $500 to $1,000 per weekend, bare minimum. No way around it. And granted, that hour or two of track time will be way more interesting than sitting in your living room or in your spare bedroom driving a sim, but man, that is going to be really expensive over time. I mean, for a solid weekend, you might get an hour or two of track time, so you're paying upwards of $500 an hour to operate this car, not including the purchase price. That is just a lot. I think it's too much. The third option that we haven't confronted yet is renting. You can get away from that huge initial upfront cost by just renting a cool car, driving it on a racetrack, and then leaving it there. You don't have to pay for the consumables, the car, anything like that. You arrive and drive. I did this here at the Porsche Experience Center LA, and it was really incredible. My dad and I drove a 911 GT3 and a 911 Turbo S back to back. We just kind of switched back and forth throughout the afternoon, had a solid hour on track. It was expensive. It was like $1,200 a person, plus we had to go to California, so that's at least $1,200 an hour of track time, so that's even more expensive, but you're only out that one lump of cash in the beginning of the day, and that's it. So you're not having to buy, maintain, fix, worry about the car. You can just go and do this thing that's very much like a low lift. It's almost like a vacation experience where you just come to the track, you show up and you drive and you have fun. And in some ways, this is the most tempting thing to me because you get to experience the track and have no inconvenience of owning and prepping and worrying about your own car, because I did not sign up for the car hobby so I could wrench on them. I want to drive. I need to be in motion. I want to be enjoying the process of operating the vehicle and driving and learning. And learning is really my goal, because I feel like the level of skill to be a great driver is so high that we all have so much room to grow. And even though I've done some driving schools at Chuckwalla Valley Raceway, I did some driving school at Bondurant. I've had 10, 12, 15 track days. I've done a bit of karting. All those things combined make me probably a much better than average driver, but I am nothing compared to anybody who's even semi-pro. And that to me is so much fun to think about reeling in that skill gap and trying to get better and better. Plus the process itself is just really fun. But I learned something unexpected and unpleasant whenever I was driving these Porsches. Going fast is not only hard, it's really uncomfortable. I mean, these cars are performing at such a high level, even on street tires, that it like physically is something that you have to get used to. I feel like the Turbo S especially was rearranging my insides. I didn't know a car could be that fast. I mean, obviously a drag racing car could be, but a street car like that, I had no idea that something could accelerate that fast and just be a normal, cushy, comfortable everyday car. The thing blew me away. And it was kind of unpleasant in some ways. I mean, it was cool, but it wasn't leaving me begging for more, like, oh, I wish I could keep going. I wish I could keep going faster. Where the slower, lower horsepower and lighter weight cars I've driven in the past have left me with that feeling. So then that brings me back to sim racing, because maybe a sim racing cockpit that's in a spare room could do a lot of the fun things for driving, could get you a lot of seat time, but not break the bank, not make you feel sick, not have to store some race car out in your side yard or something. Like, I don't have a place to put a race car, do you? But the question is, how good of a platform and how good of a system do you need to make it worthwhile? I mean, something like this that's $230 is probably kind of junky. I mean, if it's not a good enough setup to replicate driving well and help you to learn and help you to have a good time, it's not worth it. And I feel like I've learned that here in my 30s, where if you don't buy a good enough thing in the first place, you shouldn't even buy it at all. So something like this, not appealing to me. Not doing that. The problem with sim racing, along with a lot of hobbies, is it's a slippery slope. I mean, these things just get out of control really quickly. This company kind of tickles my fancy because everything looks like it's high quality, well engineered, fairly reasonably priced. I mean, $650 for just the cockpit itself seems decent, but then you got to add on wheel, monitor, computer, all that kind of thing. I feel like about the cheapest I could get into this is around $2,500, because you got to have a cockpit, you've got to have a steering wheel, you've got to have pedals, you've got to have a shifter, things like that. A console is probably cheaper to get into than an actual gaming PC. So a PS5 is like $500. I've got a monitor, I've got a keyboard, I've got a mouse. So for $2,500, I could have something like a sim racing rig that runs decent games. I mean, compared to like when I was in college and I had a Logitech G29, this is light years above that. But I still haven't been able to test a setup like this to say this is replicating driving well enough to where it's worth the money, or it's actually kind of trash. That'd be really helpful if you have experience driving kind of a mid-level sim racing setup on console versus PC. That would be super cool to see if you've got feedback to say, you know what, the console is fun, but it's not like real driving practice, or hey, the console gives you that muscle memory and teaches you things well enough to where it translates to real life. I'd love to hear that too. But the conundrum of real race car versus sim race car is just a tricky one. There's so much time and energy that goes into maintaining a real physical car, and almost no time and energy that goes into maintaining and operating a sim rig. And so it's really appealing because of that. Plus, if I had a sim rig, then I could probably figure out how to live stream and I could put videos up here. And so we could do that together, or we could race each other online, and that would be really cool. So I'm looking to you for your input. What do you think is worthwhile? Should I buy a race car? Should I buy a sim racing setup? Or should we not do any of that and just live cheaply and invest a lot and rent cool cars every now and then? If you made it this far into the video, you are officially on the last lap, and I appreciate that because you've watched this far. But if you're not subscribed yet, I need you to do that for me, please. I'm 600 subscribers away from getting monetized on YouTube, which will mean that things like this can actually happen. I'll have a budget to go and rent really cool cars on Turo and then create video reviews. Or I'll have a budget to buy a sim rig and make video game content, or buy a real race car. I mean, that would be the freaking dream. So if you'd subscribe and you'd tell your friends to subscribe, that would literally be life-changing for me, because this has been my dream for 15 years to make car videos on the internet, and here we are. Let's do it. All right, thanks. See you next time. Bye.